The barista's laughter echoed through the cafe, cutting through the quiet hum of conversation. "Really? That's your order?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she stared at the young man in front of her. The entire room turned to watch, their curiosity piqued. What he did next, though, wasn't just unexpected. It left everyone in the cafe completely speechless. The young man stood in line, blending into the relaxed crowd at the cafe. He wasn't flashy or loud. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way not to attract attention. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans, his tall frame had a slightly hunched posture, as if trying to take up less space. A quiet presence, calm and unassuming, he scanned the menu overhead, though it looked like he already knew what he wanted. This was Barron Trump, someone who had grown up in the spotlight, but now just wanted to enjoy a moment of normalcy. There was no entourage, no signs of privilege, just a young man looking for a cup of coffee like everyone else. His expression was neutral, but his eyes carried a depth that suggested he had learned to watch the world carefully, perhaps more carefully than most people his age. Behind the counter stood the barista. Her sharp eyes darted between orders and customers, her movements quick and practiced. She was in her mid-20s with a competent energy that suggested she'd seen her fair share of challenging mornings. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail that threatened to fall apart at any moment. She had a natural charm, the kind that often came with a quick wit and a sharper tongue. But when Barron stepped up to place his order, something shifted. The barista's lips curled into a smirk, and a spark of mischief lit her eyes. As he calmly asked for a caramel macchiato, she couldn't help herself. "A caramel macchiato?" she said, her voice loud enough for a few nearby customers to hear. A laugh escaped her, a mocking sound that made people in the cafe pause and glance over. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Barron didn't react. He simply stood there, his calm gaze meeting hers. There was no anger, no embarrassment, just a steady patience that seemed to unnerve her. The room, now filled with curious onlookers, waited to see how he would respond. There was something in his demeanor, a quiet strength, a confidence that didn't need to be loud, that hinted this interaction was about to take an unexpected turn. Barron stood at the counter, his calm demeanor unchanged as the barista's laughter echoed across the cafe. She leaned against the counter, clearly enjoying the moment. "Let me guess," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Extra whipped cream too? Maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon?" Her smirk widened and a few customers chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to join in or stay quiet. The tension in the room thickened. Conversations paused. A man near the corner table glanced up from his laptop, his curiosity piqued. A couple sitting by the window exchanged a look, their whispers barely audible over the growing silence. The barista, sensing the attention, doubled down. "Come on, caramel macchiato? Do you even know what that is?" she said, her voice tinged with mockery. Barron didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, his steady gaze meeting hers. "I do," he replied evenly, his voice quiet but firm. "It's what I'd like." The simplicity of his answer threw her off for a moment, but she quickly recovered, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. All right, she said, grabbing a cup and scrawling his order on it with exaggerated flair. "1 caramel macchiato for the gentleman." She placed the cup in the line of orders with a dramatic gesture and turned back to Barron. I just think it's funny," she added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Someone like you ordering something so basic." Her tone was biting, but it was the way she said "someone like you" that made the air in the room feel heavier. Barron's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something calm but resolute. He took a small step forward, resting his hands lightly on the counter. "And what do you think someone like me should order?" he asked, his voice steady and polite. It wasn't a challenge, it was a question, simple and direct. The barista blinked, her smirk faltering. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. "I don't know," she said with a shrug, trying to regain control. "Something more sophisticated, I guess." Barron nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering her words. "I think coffee is about what you enjoy," he said, his tone disarming. Not what others think is sophisticated. But I'm curious, what's your favorite drink? The question caught her off guard. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she fumbled for an answer. I guess I like a simple espresso, she said, her voice quieter now. That's a good choice, Barron replied with a small smile. Strong, straightforward. You should have one after this rush. Sounds like you've been working hard. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she didn't respond. The room, still filled with silent onlookers, seemed to shift. The mocking tone she had carried moments before began to waver, replaced by something less certain. But before she could reply, a voice from the side cut through the tension. That's a fair point, said an older man sitting nearby, his deep voice carrying across the room. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a knowing smile on his face. I've been coming here for years, and I order the same plain black coffee every day. Guess that makes me basic too. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, easing some of the tension. The barista glanced at the man, then back at Barron. For the first time, she looked a little embarrassed. I didn't mean anything by it, she said, her voice softer. I was just joking. I get that, Barron said kindly, but sometimes jokes land differently than we expect. The cafe was quiet now, but the mood had shifted. What started as a moment of ridicule was becoming something else, something more reflective. The barista glanced down at the counter, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. I didn't mean to upset you, she said finally. Barron shook his head. I'm not upset, he replied, but I think there's always a better way to connect with people than making fun of them. You never know what someone's dealing with. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The barista looked up, her expression softening. There was a flicker of understanding in her eyes, as if she was beginning to see him and herself in a new light. The customers, still watching intently, seemed to feel it too. A woman near the counter gave a small nod, as if silently agreeing with Barron's words. The older man who had spoken earlier raised his cup slightly in approval. The barista straightened up, taking a deep breath. You're right, she said, her voice steadier now. I'll try to remember that. Barron offered a small smile, his calm energy never wavering. We all have moments, he said. It's what we do after that counts. As the tension melted away, the barista turned to start making his drink, her movements quieter and more deliberate. The customers began to relax, hum of conversation slowly returning to the room. But the moment wasn't forgotten. It lingered, an unexpected ripple of reflection and connection in an ordinary cafe. As the barista handed over Barron's drink, her usual briskness seemed to soften. She hesitated for a moment, her hand lingering on the counter. Look, she began, her voice quieter now. I guess I should explain. It's not really about you. Barron paused, his calm eyes encouraging her to continue. She glanced around, noticing that some of the customers were still listening, but no longer with the same intensity. Taking a deep breath, she let the words tumble out. It's just, days like this get to me, she admitted, her voice wavering. I've been working here for 3 years. It's not a bad job, but it's not where I thought I'd be. I was supposed to go to college. I had plans to study art, maybe even open my own gallery one day. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. But life doesn't always go the way you plan. My dad got sick, and the medical bills piled up fast. I had to drop out after the first semester to help my mom keep up with everything. Since then, it's just been work. Day after day, feeling like I'm stuck in the same place, watching everyone else move forward. Her words hung heavy in the air, hum of the cafe fading into the background. A flicker of vulnerability crossed her face, one she seemed to immediately regret showing. She straightened up, trying to pull herself together. Bill followed her, remaining close behind her. Anyway, it's stupid, I know. It's not your problem. I guess seeing someone like you, so calm, so sure of yourself, it reminded me of everything I haven't done yet. And maybe that's why I snapped. Barron's expression softened, his gaze steady but filled with understanding. It's not stupid, he said gently. It's human, and I think you're stronger than you realize. She blinked, caught off guard by his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "You're here," Barron said simply. "You stepped up for your family. You've been working hard, day after day, even when it's not easy. That takes strength, more than most people realize." Her eyes glistened as she looked down, fiddling with the edge of her apron. "I don't want this to be all there is," she whispered. "It won't be," Barron said firmly. "Sometimes the path isn't clear right away, but it doesn't mean you're not moving forward. You're just taking a different route." The cafe was still, the weight of the moment settling over everyone who had overheard. The barista nodded slowly, as if letting his words sink in. "Thanks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I needed to hear that." For the first time, her smirk was replaced by a genuine smile. It wasn't wide or bright, but it carried something deeper, hope. The barista placed Barron's drink on the counter with a quiet, genuine smile. It was a far cry from the smirk she had worn earlier, replaced by something warmer, something real. "I'm sorry for how I acted," she said, her voice steady but soft. "And thanks for being patient with me." Barron nodded, picking up the cup and offering her the same calm smile that had disarmed her from the start. "It's all right," he replied. "Sometimes we all just need someone to listen." The cafe had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but those who had witnessed the exchange seemed lighter, their own expressions softened. A woman near the door caught Barron's eye and gave him a small nod, as if silently acknowledging the kindness he had shown. The older man in the corner raised his coffee cup in a subtle gesture of approval. The barista, still standing behind the counter, glanced around the cafe and seemed to notice the subtle shift too. The tension she had carried in her shoulders for hours began to ease. Her eyes met Barron's one last time as he prepared to leave, and she called out, "Hey, I'll try to remember what you said about strength and moving forward." Barron turned back, his hand resting lightly on the door. "You've got this," he said simply, his tone filled with quiet encouragement. "And don't forget, espresso is a great choice." She laughed softly, shaking her head. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first step towards something better. As Barron stepped outside, the crisp morning air greeted him. The cafe behind him seemed brighter somehow, its warmth spilling onto the street. He took a sip of his caramel macchiato, the taste sweeter than he'd expected, and smiled to himself. Sometimes he thought, it didn't take grand gestures to make a difference, just a little patience, a kind word, and the willingness to see someone as more than the moment they were in. It was a reminder to himself, to the barista, and to everyone in the cafe that we're all carrying something, and kindness has the power to change the way we move forward. This story is a reminder that everyone is fighting battles we don't always see. A moment of judgment can so easily overshadow someone's struggles, but a moment of kindness has the power to change everything. Barron didn't need to raise his voice or prove a point. He simply chose to listen, to respond with patience and understanding rather than anger. In doing so, he not only shifted the perspective of the barista, but also left a ripple of positivity that touched everyone around them. Sometimes, the smallest acts of empathy, whether it's offering a kind word or choosing to see beyond someone's frustration, can make the biggest difference. This story reminds us that kindness isn't just a choice, it's a strength, one that has the power to inspire and connect us all. If this story inspired you, take a moment today to practice kindness, whether it's a smile, a kind word, or simply listening to someone who needs it. Small acts can make a big difference, just like they did in this cafe. And if you want more stories that remind us of the power of empathy and understanding, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Together we can spread positivity, one story at a time.